Okay, good morning, everyone. I will begin as people start to enter the room. I hope everyone is all right on this Thursday morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to the latest BCO NextGen webinar and the first in our Diversity and Inclusion series. My name is Andy Levy and I sit on the BCO NextGen Committee for London and the South East. I'm a partner at Ryder Levitt Bucknell, RLB, where I lead our project management service in the London commercial sector, and importantly, I'm part of our national diversity and inclusion working community. Today, I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Neil Smith, who literally wrote the book on inclusive design. Neil is currently the inclusive design lead for HS2, the largest infrastructure project in the UK. Neil is also one of the Mayor of London's design advocates and chair of the London Legacy Development Corporation's Built Environment Access Panel. Before joining HS2, he was the head of inclusive design at Bureau Happold Engineering. He was the principal author of the Mayor's supplementary planning guidance, Accessible London, and was the author of both the Olympic Delivery Authority and LLDC's inclusive design standards. Neil sits on the advisory board of the National Register of Access Consultants and represents the NRAC on the Construction Industry Council's Diversity and Inclusion Panel and BSI Committee, Design of an Accessible and Inclusive Environment, which is responsible for BS 8300. As I said, he wrote the book, and so we couldn't have a more qualified speaker here with us today. Good morning to you, Neil.
Good morning, thank you.
So the format for this morning is that Neil's going to give a presentation on inclusive design, focused around the office space, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So please feel free to submit any questions you have, and we'll try to answer them all at the end. Before you start, Neil, to put this webinar into context, obviously D&I is a wide-ranging topic and one that the BCO NextGen are really keen to explore over the next few months. So today is a chance to educate ourselves on what we should be looking for when working on commercial projects to help us feel more confident, knowledgeable, and empowered to challenge the brief, the design, and the status quo to ensure we're creating offices for everyone. So it's over to you, Neil.
Thank you. Put the slides up. Thank you. Yeah, I want to probably pose more questions than give answers to, because I think one of the hardest things to when talking about inclusive design is to what does inclusive design actually look like? When where in reality, good design is design for people. So I think it's more about the process than the end product, because for each environment it will be different. But I want to start off with a philosophy that's I've really followed for many years now, and it's really informed my approach to work. And quite rightly, we talk about sustainable design, the need for sustainable design. And I think from this is a great quote, but that really, we can be I can be an accessible inclusive without worrying necessarily about my carbon footprint in order to get the end product. But actually, in order to get something sustainable, it can't be sustainable without being accessible and inclusive. If people aren't at the heart of the end product, then it's not a sustainable product. And so inclusive design is a critical part of the design process for me, and I think it should be for all of us. In terms of where we are, I've been doing this for 20 odd years or so. I still think for a lot of the conversation we have, we're still designing around the average individual, and therefore in many respects the end product is not equally shared. And that an individual, I think if we kind of look at UK building regulations, is predominantly male, white, and about 6 foot, 5'11", and fairly got good dexterity, good eyesight, and a bit of strength to be able to use things. It doesn't really take on board a broader piece of thinking about the demographic of who we're trying to design for. And I think there's also many misconceptions. often have discussions about the DDA bit. Well, the DDA, I think, for a start, the Disability Discrimination Act, that disappeared in 2010 with the Equality Act from a British perspective. So, and it's not the DDA bit that really is there. I mean, yes, we have the Equality Act, and the Equality Act is an important piece of civil rights legislation that gives rights to a significant amount of people. It's a legal framework that to protect the rights of individuals, advance equality of opportunity for all, and it covers 9 different protected characteristics: age, disability, gender, reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy, maternity and race, religion or belief, and sex and sexual orientation. And it was formed by taking all the different pieces of civil rights legislation, such as the Disability Discrimination Act and the Race Relations Act, together into one piece, unifying piece of legislation that defines what discrimination is and defines what organizations, whether they're employers or service providers or public bodies, need to put in place in order to remove discrimination, and they also put in place the consequences of discrimination. But when it comes to the built environment, this is where there's in some respects a really big hole in this, because quite rightly it recognises that for many disabled people, the actual built environment creates barriers and therefore creates discrimination. You know, very simple one: steps into a building stops somebody who's unable to use stairs getting into the building. They're being discriminated against because somebody hasn't removed those steps or thought about it. So, you know, there is built into the Act the requirement to address physical barriers and in fact address provisions of services and equipment and auxiliary aids in terms of reasonable adjustments for disabled people. But then he doesn't talk about the other protected characteristics. So it doesn't talk about reasonable adjustments for the built environment based on gender or age. So it doesn't, for disabled people, it gives a rights, but it doesn't necessarily then say, when we're thinking about diversity and inclusion, it doesn't really cover all of the built environment, all the different protected characteristics. So we will come on to talk about toilets. Toilets are a big thing when we talk about diversity and inclusion. It covers provision of toilets that meet the needs of disabled people, but it doesn't talk about the needs of somebody who's transgender or a woman or a child in that context. It talks about policy and procedures, and I think there is, in my mind, a route to looking at the procurement routes and equality and diversity, and looking at how we specify that through an approach to that through that procurement route that identifies that need, that can go beyond disability. But just saying comply with your obligations under the Equality Act doesn't necessarily mean we're addressing diversity inclusion in the built environment in its full sense. And so I think we possibly need to think of it from a different tack. And I think diversity in terms of, this is the latest McKinsey report, identifies that diversity within a company has benefits commercially. That diversity of thought, diversity of mindset, diversity of employees' lived experience that brings together as an industry has demonstrated to increase performance. But also, I think it's organizations that are addressing it are actually attracting talent as well. So I'm going to use FAIR as an example. FAIR, which is an employee-run network, intersectional network within Bureau Habit Engineering, which I was involved with FAIR while I was there. They're a group. That was, as I said, employee-run. They formed this network to get themselves. They formed it with the desire to change their workplace and change the way that Bureau Happel's partners thought about their workplace and what they were doing. And they had the ear of the partner. The partners, it had an impact on the way Bureau Happel thinks. So when it came to our office refurbishment, FAIR were one of the stakeholders that had a say in where the design was going as well. And I think it's, and I think it's I believe if the partners hadn't recognised the importance of FAIR, they'd have lost the talent that's in that group. They'd have gone to a company that recognised that. So I think that it's an important one that, those employee networks are important. I think, the management organisations need to recognise the importance, but also recognise that if they want to keep that talent, it's not just their policies and procedures and attitude, it's actually the built environment that we work in. If we don't have a built environment that reflects that diversity doesn't want to be part of it. So which brings me to the point of who are we actually designing for? I said if we look at what's in our basic requirements, so if we from building regulations, part of the building regulations, it used to be designed for disabled people. That changed back in 2004. Design for people to access and use, but it's still predominantly based on the needs of people, predominantly with mobility requirements. It touches on some issues around sight and sensory requirements, but it doesn't touch on a lot of things, and it doesn't talk about gender reassignment or marriage or race or religion or belief. And in 2012, when we were well, actually it was 2006 when we were when we were pulling together the standards for 2012, one of the things that we reflected on then was the need to think about the broader protected characteristics, which weren't legislation at that point, but reflecting on that definition of inclusive design and who we should be meted for. So we had this definition that we were trying to react to, and within it, when it talks about accommodating, it talks about people regardless of age, gender, mobility, ethnicity, or circumstance. So in developing the 2012 the standards for 2012, though we had not got the research or the data, we started to try and address gender and faith within the design standards, thinking about that broader experience of what it would mean for somebody coming to the games, and then have developed that further. So the 2019 London Legacy Development Corporation has really reflected on that, so looking at that from a broader sense. And it wasn't until 2018 that actually this thinking got into the British standards. So if we look at BS 8300 now, it starts to talk about age and it starts to talk about faith, not to a great extent, but I think at least it's now in the thought process. We may end up, give it another 10 years, we might actually have something that addresses in our building regulations, something a bit more that represents the population we're designing for. But I think this is a really important one for me, is this definition, because it doesn't define a final solution. It doesn't say it's got to be this big by that big and it's got to be there, it's got to be this high. It talks about a process that we have to think about everyone being able to use an environment safely, easily, and with dignity. It's about, there's an element here about being realistic. There is compromise within design. We can't meet the designs of everybody. The perfect example of not meeting the needs or conflicting is the dropped curb, where we've got a curb is there for many reasons, and actually is beneficial for somebody who's blind or partly sighted, especially a cane user, because it's their demarcation line between where's safe and where's the vehicles. But obviously, if you're a wheelchair user, the curb's kind of a barrier because you can't cross the road. So you drop the curb, which immediately makes it unsafe for somebody who's blind because they can walk into the road. So you put in tactile paving, so it becomes a warning. But then that tactile paving, especially if you've got something like a spinal injury, is really uncomfortable to cross. So we don't have an ideal solution, but we've come up with a solution that's trying to meet the needs of varying people. And I think it's the kind of thing we need to apply across, but it's trying to understand the impact of the design on all the people who go use it to come to a solution. But I think there are many things in it, but it's a lot of it, I think, is also design quality. And it's a mindset. When I start, this is Selwyn Goldsmith's Designing for the Disabled. This is the third edition, but I think I've got the second edition. But the first edition came out in '63, and it was a seminal piece of work. And it if you look at the British standards in the '70s and through to our building regulations in the 2000s, Selwyn's work was embodied in that. The design of the accessible loo originally came from Selwyn. It's been developed since, but a lot of the work was through his mindset. But the thing was, it was designing for the disabled, and this is an approach that when I joined, it was the disabled, them, others, not us. And it's specifically, when a lot of people talk about inclusive design, their immediately thought is the wheelchair symbol of the international symbol of disability. It's the accessible loo and it's ramps and toilets, but it's not actually. When we look at the impacts of the built environment on a broad range of people, that's not the approach I'd like to talk about. Those are the basics we should be getting right. They're in the regulations, they're in the requirements. We should be able to deliver that without really thinking about it. I think it's a broader issues. And when we talk about what does good look like, this is an example that see quite a lot that's promoted as good practice. I could spend quite a lot of time telling you why it's not. For a start, it's unsafe. You're trying to meet the needs of somebody who can use steps and somebody who's a wheelchair user. You're actually building in conflict between the two. You're actually making it fairly unsafe for a wheelchair user if you want to go flying off the top edge of the stairs and down them. It doesn't answer it. So we need to think more carefully about it rather than something, we'll just throw it all into one design. We need to pick it apart a bit and actually think, well, that actually doesn't work for those user groups. And maybe we do have a different solution for some people. I think the intent always, though, has to be about the equity of the experience that we face. So I think one good example of this is being involved in lots of schemes where we're promoting active health, which we do need to do. We all, especially in the last year and a half, most of us like me have put on a couple of pounds. We haven't gone outside and done anything. Actually, we should have buildings that promote healthy attitudes, that promote activities that supports mental health. It supports all kinds of things. But a gut reaction to this has been, we take the stairs and we make them prominent, really well designed, and then we throw the lift around the corner, around the back. It's hidden, so people don't use the lift, which means that anybody who can't use the stairs has a secondary experience. They're no longer as valid an individual as the people who use stairs. It gives the message that they don't have that same right. So the challenge, I think, from a design perspective, is we need the stairs there and well designed to encourage people, but we need the lift right by it. So anybody who's using that building has the same experience as they move up through it, rather than somebody being made to feel secondary through their access requirements. And interestingly enough, it doesn't necessarily just start, I think, from your front door. Location is important. I had quite a lot of discussions over the last few weeks with different individuals about the safety of coming back to work, and quite a lot of discussions have been about the journey to and location of where you're working. Yeah, how safe is that experience? How safe do you feel arriving at 8:30 in the morning at a location? This is a map of London showing different safety statistics. So I think actually when thinking about where we work, do we feel comfortable leaving at 6:30 at night on a dark winter's evening? What's the environment around there as well? I think that is an important factor in thinking about how the inclusivity of the workplace. And then getting in the front door and the message we want to give. And I think there's a point to be made here about whether we're talking about something just being accessible or something being inclusive. It's a lot easier to make something accessible than it is for it to make it an inclusive environment. This is a revolving door, and I think lots of conversations I've had about revolving doors, because they're there for the main reason is for your energy. You are saving heat loss or heat gain through using a revolving door and not having wide open doors into reception area. Your receptionist, therefore, is more comfortable. You don't spend less energy on heating or cooling the reception space. But if you can't use a revolving door, and many people can't, we look what it says in the British Standard. It's not just people who are wheelchair users. If you've got an assistance dog, they can't use revolving doors. Neuroprocessing, that can be quite difficult. So any form of mobility, they become quite hard. So as a person unable to use that, you almost, again, become secondary. You have to almost ask permission to enter the building. You've got a little pass door there. You press a button, and hopefully it's working, because quite often it's also locked. And there's usually a big sign, disabled access only, and it's never repaired. So it doesn't. Your experience of coming in and out of the building, again, you don't have the same experience that somebody else does. So it's accessible, it works, you can get in the front door, but not necessarily in the same way. Function over form. So this is an image of Apple's new headquarters, which absolutely beautiful. But on the first day of opening, I think it was at least 7 members of staff reportedly coming to harm by walking into the glass because they couldn't see it. An incredibly specified glass, but it was so beautiful that it was invisible. And having a partner who's also broken her nose through walking into a glass door. And glazing is fantastic. It gives us views. It's an important tool about being able to see outside and support well-being and bring light in. But it's also needs to be thought about in context of, is it usable and safe? Now, making sure that you can actually, where it is there, that it's easily identifiable as being present, so your nose remains in one piece. I haven't really got examples in this of, as I said, of what good looks like, because good is so different to different people. This is the new broadcast centre for the BBC in Wales. And they're an interesting body. Have worked with them in the past on their workplace standards. And they really have interrogated in detail what it means to be neurodiverse and what the impact of being neurodiverse is on their workplace, and therefore what solutions do they need to come up with. And so there's a resource at the end I'll give to you at the end of this talk that takes you to their work. So I think it's really interesting, and a lot of this is how we design for the mind, how we design for neurodiversity, how we design for well-being of the mind. I think in an office environment is critical, and recognizing that diversity, but also recognizing that we need choice, and I think it's the choice that's an important one. Which was one talking to the facilities manager of a large internet retailer, and they'd just been through an office refurbishment and had come up with problems because their team that are doing all the programming had been in this quiet part of the building, and they got moved. They got swapped with their creative team. The creative team worked in a kind of open environment with lots of hard surfaces. It was really live environment, and they really liked it. And they got moved to where the programmers were, which was kind of a dead space and acoustically sealed. And they didn't like it because they felt it didn't. They lost that liveness. But at the same time, the programmers had been moved from this quite quiet space into this very space that had lots of background noise and lots of clatter, and actually was creating a lot of sensory overload for a lot of the team, and it became a negative impact. So it was, and partly due to the fact that potentially quite a lot of that team were could have been on the autistic spectrum or had some form of neurodiversity processing that meant that type of environment had a negative impact. So it's not one size suits all. We need to think about teams and but also give choice. So some people are quite happy to rack up and plunk the laptop down and use a a hot desk, whereas others may want control, may need to have adaptions. I've worked in office environments where you've got big stickers. This is my chair. The reason it's my chair is it's cost £300 more than yours, and it's specially adapted to my back condition. Don't take it away. So some people need that bespoke nature to their working environment, whereas others. So we can't go, and I think that's where we engage with people through the process to think about what is the right requirement, and give them options to have different working patterns as they use the space. And it's not just about, I think quite a lot of spaces within offices and buildings is not just purely about being productive, it's how to support people being productive. The image here on the left actually is Selfridges. It's not an office environment. I hadn't realised this, but this is their quiet space, and it's beautiful, a place of calm to escape from your retail excesses. But I think the nature of quiet space and faith is important, and I think recognizing there needs to be that diversity within the spaces you have that allow either people to move away from any times of stress and contemplate. Also, just to recognize that people do want to pray. And certain religions, there is a more formal process of prayer that needs to be respected, and giving space over to that allows people to feel that they have the right to be themselves within that environment, rather than it being trying to find spaces that don't exist. So, if we talk about efficiency of floor plate, we're not necessarily there. But if we want to talk about efficiency of staff in the working environment, it's a different equation. There isn't the science to that, but there's a level of respect that goes into that. And then it's getting down to other things like the details. So your social spaces. I've just taken this image off the internet. It's I found it quite interesting. So from a cognitive processing, I find that quite challenging. That pattern is quite strong and very difficult, and that could be from overload. But I think also when we talk about heavy patterns, where we're talking about areas where people communicate, if you rely on lip reading and you've got this busy background behind you, it makes it very difficult to lip read. But also if you are neurodiverse and pattern and processing, this could start to have an impact on you. So the actual detail of the fit out is important, but then also from social spaces, if I was a wheelchair user, I wouldn't be able to be part of my colleagues in this space. There isn't an option for me. I've got to be high up. I can't reach the taps. I can't get a cup of coffee because all the cups are at high level. So I'm actually thinking about, and I don't want everything down at sitting height, because if I'm 6'2" and arthritic, I'm not bending down to get that. So it's about making sure we have that diversity of options within this one space to make sure that we're all able to go into that space and use it. But it's not just the heights, it's also the control. So if you've got if you don't have that dexterity within your fingers, pressing buttons becomes difficult. So actually the detailed specification, it's whether you can reach it and then touch it and understand it, are important features. So we do need to go through into minutiae sometimes in thinking about the usability of spaces and the impact they can have. We don't want to be in a space where you've got to ask a work colleague to get you a cup of coffee because you can't use that space. But also from a processing point of view, smells also can be sensory overload, and making sure that there's a separation between, or an easy separation between places of work and places of eating. And then on to the most trickiest one, toilets. There is no one solution. So for a start, I'll come back to this graphic. We'll start on the basic one, the accessible loo. This is a fairly typical accessible toilet. I'm fairly sure it meets most of. I don't quite know what the thing at the back how you're supposed to use that, but mainly it kind of meets it. I'm not going to audit whether it works or not, but I think we all agree on it looks awful. There's no design quality, and it's institutional. And I think what it says to anybody using it is, we've made the minimum requirements. We haven't really thought about you, but at least you can go to the loo. I've been into offices where you've got this kind of provision for the accessible, and you go into the kind of standard cubicle blocks, and they're like artworks. And I think toilets are a reflection on the culture and the respect that people have for their employees. And this isn't an office; this is actually Victoria Station, but it's a bit of biophilia artwork within the Network Rails toilet. I think it's fantastic. So I think there is design quality for all of us is definitely a point, but also the notion of what kind of space we want. And yeah, I've seen solutions where we go to all non-gendered. Well, actually, I think that's not the solution that meets everybody's needs either. Some people will find an all-gendered solution a barrier, either through belief systems or just through the environment that creates, and whether as a woman you feel safe in an environment that is shared, where actually this is a space that is beneficial but not shared, but also do you have that non-gendered facility as part of the mix? And I think it is providing a mix that creates a better environment that gives choice, and if there is space, that really is a better way to go. And being involved in refurbishments where that safe space was taken away from staff and made all non-gendered, created major upset because a lot of the women in the staff felt that safe space was taken away from them, and it became more of a challenge in the office environment. So I think it's a very emotive topic, but also one that needs to be thought through. But I think providing that a range and a choice is important. But I think to kind of come to the end of presentation tools, I think where do we go? Because I think what is important, I think as Andy talked about, for me it's important where people do feel that they're able to challenge the brief, and we should always challenge the brief, because we've got to make sure the brief is right. And it's not this isn't about gold plating. It's about getting the right solution and understanding what that is. And I would say the starting point for me is this, which is the roadmap for change. So this was a piece of work that was done a year and a half, 2 years ago by the CIC Diversity Inclusion Panel, and it's a web-based tool, and it is aimed at the construction industry, but I think it has a broader audience. And the vision, I think, is critical. An inclusive and interactive built environment that represents the communities that we serve. The point we're saying within this is, if we are going to design and attract the talent to design the environments, that we have to have an environment that also reflects them. And that's from a cultural perspective, and a policy and procedure and employment and built environment. So it has a whole range of different tools for different elements. So there's a section on inclusive design, there's a section on identity, there's a section on development and promotion. So it's following all the different areas within employment, and it is aimed at employers to help them think about it. But I think it also gives useful tools to people wanting to understand this more. and dive into it, and it's not. It's a bit of being a roadmap. Part of that is it also has pointers to other areas. So if you go into the inclusive design section, it will give you pointers to other case studies to go and look at and at different examples. This is the BBC Design for the Mind site. So it's got an environmental checklist in there and background information. So, and I think this is a really interesting area. And when we were rewriting BS 300 that came out in 2018, we started to touch on design for the mind, but realized there wasn't significant research to really encompass this within the British standard. We have to have a level of research and evidence before we can put something to a British standard, so it wasn't put in. There is a PAS being published this year, so an advisory piece from the British Standard Institute on design for the mind, and it will be influenced by work such as this. So I think there is a lot of new information that is coming out to look at how we design our environments, to thinking about it from a neurodiverse perspective, and that's I think when we talk about adversity, that's an incredibly broad term that can cover things like dementia, autism, dyslexia. So I think it is a critical one when we actually think about all our makeups. I think we're all kind of neurodivergent in some respect. The Design Council, this is a very useful tool. This started out as a hub where it had that hub is still there, so it is kind of like a library to lots of good practice documents. But they also have training there now, again, and aimed at the built environment, but a very useful training tool on inclusive environments that's online, that you can, that's free, that you can line up to do. And then finally, the National Reduced for Access Consultants, which I'm as a advisory group member, I'm duty bound to highlight. But through all of this, there is a professional body that available for advice as well. There are accredited consultants who advise on access and inclusion and the implications of that on the built environment. So I think there are points where if decisions need to be made, it is always advisable, if the scale of the project is there, to get the right type of advice to onto the scheme. But thank you. Kind of a whistle-stop tour through my meanderings on inclusive environments and offices, but hopefully one that's either sparked questions or answered some.
Sure. No, thank you so much, Neil. I absolutely covered a load there, and yeah, really, really informative. I think the things that really stood out for me there were, you said this isn't about designing for others, it's about designing for us, inclusive and yeah, taking everybody in the workforce, everyone in the community. And also the experience of getting to the office. We are, our members and attendees today are mostly, commercial based, but we've all got that experience of recognizing that journey from your transport node to the office. So lighting and the public realm features, it makes a massive difference. That's definitely something to think about. And just making sure, as you said, that we have the same experience, that everybody has the same experience when coming into the office and using the office. So that's brilliant. We do have a couple of questions that have come through. I suppose one of the questions to come through, we've got members today and attendees who work for developers, agents, architects, who will maybe under pressure to lose that quiet room, to maximize lettable floor space. What's your advice? What's your advice to them?
It's a difficult one, but I think we need to be clear that first of all, it's an interesting one post-COVID. How do we attract people back into the workplace, and what does that workplace need to offer now? I think it's about respecting that if we are to make our workforce efficient, we need to have a workplace that they feel comfortable in and gives them that ability to feel that they're able to do that. I think if we treat people as units, and I think I was reading a fantastic piece around how the open plan office design through engineering and the ability to create those large spans meant that you could just get all of the desks in, and the starting point was the American military, and that level of efficiency had no thought about the interaction of human beings. It was purely about maximizing space, but I don't think that maximizes output. I think it's not, and we know it's not the hours necessarily that you put in it to get the quality of work. And in order to also, as I say, I think if you want to encourage diversity within your workforce, you need a space that attracts that diversity. So if you're not putting those features in, what talent are you missing out on?
Absolutely. Inevitably, we have a question on toilets. When I first started in the industry, someone said to me, you should always judge a place by its toilets, because, if you, exactly as you said, if people put the time and effort and care into that space, then they've probably thought about it.
Yeah.
So the question that's come through is, do you think superloos are the best solution to the toilet challenge? Or are there downsides to them too, which I think you touched on, but
I think they have lots of advantages. And
sorry, just to define superloos, that's where a cubicle with it has a sink and a hand dryer, all in one. So fine.
I mean, and I've worked on buildings where that has been the solution, but part of that is making sure within that you've got a range. So it's not that superloos are used by you still got to have them. There still needs to be a gendered approach that allows for that. We've still got to think about, well, how does that make provision for somebody who's, say, got an ambulant disability, and so the space. But I think the complexity there is, I guess, partly the communal and circulation space that goes around that, and to whether that feels safe. And I think depending on the culture of the organisation, that may or may not necessarily be the correct solution.
Fair enough. Thank you. How do you think technology can play a part, or an even bigger part, in helping create a more inclusive office, especially, I suppose, taking into account more people working from home, but in the office as well?
I think that's been an interesting one, because we've seen a level of adaptation over the last year, so quick in terms of how we work, and actually that has created for some people a level of accessibility and inclusion that they've not had before, because you don't have to struggle that journey into the office. So for quite a lot of disabled people, I think there has been some benefits, because it's driven the technology that, oh, we can't do that, it's too difficult. Well, actually, we now have to do that, so it's not that difficult. So actually, it has opened up opportunities and changed work patterns. And I know, for instance, with working in forums like the Built Environment Access Panel, I've got members who are much more engaged with the group now, because we are able to meet remotely, and therefore their needs are met. That said, it has excluded other people, and I'm not saying it's an ideal solution, but I think it's something that we don't want to lose. I think we need to be able to facilitate, and I think that's a challenge, how we create a working environment where people working remotely and in the office feel that they're working together.
Is there any one piece of technology you see when you walked into a building and go, wow, that is clever, that's brilliant, that we should do more of that? Is there anything you've, obviously, it's been a while since we've all been walking in and out of office.
I actually like it when I don't notice things. I guess that's, it's where you walk into an office and it feels comfortable. I actually, technology does some wonderful things, but I think we need to get the the actual physical basic bits right first. Yeah, I think there's lots of things we can put a digital overlay on top of, but actually getting the basics and not necessarily relying on that technology. But there is some basic bits of technology that we actually do need to take on board. Yeah. For instance, for hearing aid users, actually, how many offices do you go into if you're a hearing aid user? You can't take part in a meeting because there's no kit that means that you can do that. But I think what's interesting now on I suppose cool bits of kit, modern hearing aids are Bluetooth enabled. Yeah, you listen through your phone. So when talking about large scale meeting rooms, actually the discussion we've been having there is actually, if you've got good Wi-Fi and good Bluetooth and your network, actually, how do you then make sure you can wire in people's hearing aids into that kit rather than thinking about the induction loop? So I think that things are changing, but I think it's still just making sure we get the core design right.
That's great, thank you. And I think the last question we've got is, obviously you mentioned that it's widely proven that companies with a more diverse workforce are more innovative and are more profitable. At the end of your presentation, we'll put the links up on the YouTube channel afterwards, but which of the tools that you mentioned at the end of your presentation is sort of the best source for our members to find those quantitative benefits to show to clients to help to help drive that conversation or that challenge?
Yeah, so I think the roadmap is the starting point side, because it takes you off onto those different areas. So it's going to take you to the evidence, it's going to take you to good practice. So it's got the links through to the CIC's employer's guide. So it's got a range of different tool sets within it to interrogate. So I think I strongly recommend.
Website. Yeah, excellent.
Strongly recommend that.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Neil, for your time today and sharing your experience with us and explaining why inclusive design is so important to everyone and obviously our industry too. So obviously our vision as an industry is to create those great spaces for everyone, which meets the diverse needs of all our communities. And as you say, where we're free to move around freely and access all spaces, which ultimately, just say RLB, allows us to bring the best version of ourselves to work. So I hope this has been an enjoyable and informative webinar for our attendees, and we really look forward to seeing you at the next one. So thank you very much, Neil, and thanks everyone else for attending.
Excellent. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.